All right, it is 3 o'clock and I am going to get started because I have a lot of stuff that I want to cover in today's session. Hopefully, I can get through all of the slides that I have. If not, I will pick up next week. Uh, but definitely a lot to cover today, but we'll go through the logistic stuff first. So, welcome to the 2024 Summer and Fall EMP Study Group through On Scene First. This is week 3. So, I was going to change it to session 3 because technically it's week 4 because I had to cancel last week, I think, because of the flight issue. However, I'm just going to leave it week 3. So they just go in order and that's what it is. I already know that I have to cancel another session because I will be in flight again, but that will come off of the calendar in just a little bit. But this week is week or session 3, network design continued. Have a couple of things to finish up on what we did last week, and then types and features of a whole lot of different things. So a lot of various topics today. If you are finding this video on YouTube and you are not yet registered for the live study group, and it is somewhere before June 21st, 2024, and you plan on taking the EMP exam in the summer or fall of 2024, go ahead and scan that QR code or head on over to onscenefirst.com/training/study EMP, and you can register to be added to the live study group, which will give you access to a Google group, the calendar invite, as well as all of the updates where all the materials are that get posted during this live session. If you are watching this video after June 21st, 2024, or actually I'd say the 19th, because we'll probably stop adding people at that point, but the last session is on June 21st. And if you're watching this video afterwards and you would like to get access to all of the recordings, all of the PDFs, all of the practice exams and MP3s and any other additional information that I give, you can go to that same website. QR code is to the right. onscenefirst.com/training/study EMP. And there will be a section there to ask for access to the recorded and the previous session materials. If you are not going to take the exam until 2025, then you might want to register on the onscenefirst.com website. As soon as you go to onscenefirst.com, it says subscribe, add your contact information there. And then that way, when we put out the next live study group, which will probably be towards the end of this year, if not right at the beginning of 2025, then you can request, you'll be notified by being a member of the On Scene First newsletter mailing list. So there's that. Want to say a big thank you to Rapid SOS, our premier study group sponsor. They have been since the start of our study group back in mid 2021, and we truly appreciate their support. If we didn't have their support, I'm not sure I'd be able to do this, but thank you, Rapid SOS. And we have some scholarships. So if you're just joining us or you need that friendly reminder to jump in and fill out the form for our scholarship, I'll give you where you can go in just a second. But want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, Rapid SOS, Responder Services Consulting, and LB Comms. So if you need any of those services, please check out those folks. They are a huge help, and because of them, we are able to give away 5 scholarships to a 911 professional in the comm center who does not have their agency's financial support. So you can head on over to where that QR code is, or onscenefirst.com/scholarship. And if your agency does not cover the fee, and you are planning on taking it in the summer of 2024, go ahead and fill out the scholarship. They will be due on April 26th. So that'll be here before you know it, which is crazy. But definitely check with your admin first. We run into some problems sometimes where folks will fill it out and then I will contact the director or the designee for decision making at your agency, and they'll say, no, we pay for that. They just have to ask for it. So these scholarships are specifically for folks that their agency cannot financially support them in this endeavor. So there's that. I do want to share, because we are still pre-National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week. If you are a 911 professional in the comm center, it doesn't matter what level you are, go ahead and scan that QR code there, or head on over to onscenefirst.com/NPSTW and make sure that you register. I do ask for 2 email addresses, 2 different email addresses. One can be your work email and one can be your personal email, because during that week, thanks to my many sponsors, which I'll be doing a shout out to them on social media in the near future. I've been throwing some of them out there. Zybex and CCS, Communication Center Specialists, are our hero sponsors. So with their generosity, this is able to happen. And then we have lots of event sponsors and prize sponsors that also contribute. So basically during that Telecommunicator Week, 14th to the 20th, I will go live with my co-hosts at 6 p.m. Eastern, and we just spin a wheel and give away a ton of prizes. And I have some awards to give out, as well as some other things that I'm working on behind the scenes. So wicked fun time. Come join us. If you are looking for anything public safety, kind of telecommunicator related, head on over to onscenefirst.com/store. That's the On Scene First part of the page. It will send you over to our partners, the Squad Life. They are our distribution and production partner. And if you want to purchase anything there up until April 20th, use the code NPSTW and you will get 25% off. And my folks over there said that if you order before April 9th, it will get there before Telecommunicator Week. And then one last thing that I want to give out there to folks. I had mentioned it at the end of the last recorded session, but I'm going to put it here just in case. I'm just going to put it here so I don't forget. But I have a lot of these little Just a Voice poems. It's a poem that I wrote about being a telecommunicator with a nice little, stay safe, stay strong, stay here, we need you message on the back. So if you are wanting some of these for your folks for Telecommunicator Week, it doesn't matter how many, I have a lot. Go ahead and scan that QR code and just make sure that you put your name, your email. In the subject, please put poem, the number of cards that you need, and the full mailing address. And I will be mailing some out tomorrow, and then I will be mailing some out next Saturday. And those should get there before Telecommunicator Week. If it's after Telecommunicator Week or after the cutoff and you still want them and you're watching this video, go ahead and do the same thing and I'll just send them out to you then. But if you're not going to scan the QR code, just go over to our contact us on onscenefirst.com/contact-us. So there's that. So let's dive into today's presentation. If you're joining us today and you were not here 2 weeks ago, make sure you watch the video from 2 weeks ago. At the beginning, I shared some information on ChatGPT and how it can be super beneficial during your studying for the EMP exam. I gave a few examples, but it is beyond helpful these days. So definitely take advantage of that. So as I mentioned, not sure how many folks were on before. We have a lot of terminology to go over today, and we will do our best to give you some little tips and tricks to remember them as we do. But then some of them are truly just memorization. Unfortunately, that's kind of how it goes. And then I have something to show you at the end that I also did in the previous recorded session. And that's just basically, I have started to add some session specific multiple choice questions at the end. The first page will have the question. The second page will have the question with the answer highlighted. So there's several of those on this particular presentation, and you'll get that when the PDF goes out as well. So we will start with voice over internet protocol. There are some folks that use the term interconnected protocol, but for our purposes, it is voice over internet protocol, which is a term for a set of capabilities used to manage and deliver the delivery of voice information over the internet. So if many of you were around for a bit, you remember when VoIP phones first started coming into the industry. And I'm just curious. Maybe I'll give out a prize. I don't know. We'll see. Does anyone know what year VoIP had kind of rolled out? Any thoughts? What do you think? Shoot your answer in the chat. Let's see who remembers when we started. 2002? Nope. 95. Yes, John. Were you cheating? 1995 is when we started receiving these types of calls. And if you remember way back when, VoIP was more specific to because not many people had cell phones. Obviously, it has changed a little bit with the inception of cell phones and the copious amount of people that are using cell phones. Back then in 1995, the only people really using cell phones were like doctors and drug dealers, right? Or maybe a couple of business folks. But for the most part, we didn't see a lot of wireless devices, and folks were looking for a cheaper phone service that they were able to take with them on the move. And a lot of folks would, and especially for the folks that were not around during this time, we don't see it happening as much with people like moving their phone with them, but we are seeing some of the same issues with multi-line telephone systems. And we'll talk about that in another section. But way back in the day, folks used to take their phone, unplug it from the wall, and maybe go to Florida for 6 months out of the year. And they would just plug their phone into the wall down there. And through the internet, it would keep the same phone number. Yeah, Magic Jack for sure, Karen. And it was a pain in the butt for us because folks would forget to go on to the interwebs and change their address. So I remember getting a call for a house fire. And when I asked for the address, they gave me an address in Florida, but the Annie and Allie came back to a house here. And so back then it was very important, very, very important to, well, it's very important anyway, but you had to make sure that you were validating that address, because if not, it could have been disastrous, especially if the person says the house across the street from me is on fire. If you didn't confirm the address, then you weren't getting help to the right place. So Clint had 2 911 calls misroute like that recently. Yeah, and just curious, were they multi-line telephone calls, or were they home phone service that somebody was moving around? Because a lot of times, like if you have, and again, we'll talk about this more with multi-line phone system section. I am going to give you a webinar that I did with some folks in just a little bit. One was a home, one was a business. The other thing too that is challenging, which I'll touch base on this, is when somebody is working from home, but it is a business phone. And so we know a lot of folks are definitely working from home these days. So I think we're going to start seeing more of those challenges as well if we haven't started already. So Jessica, I'm not sure what type of phone it was, but the guy calling was in New York and we're in Northern Maine. Yeah. And so I will touch base more on those kind of missed routes in just a little bit, and then deeper in the MLTS portion. But VoIP generally, because this section we're just kind of going over that the rest of the kind of architecture section, the network section. They just want a general overview of VoIP at this time, which is a telephony term for the set of capabilities used to manage and deliver voice communications over the internet, which we said. The voice communications are sent in digital form, not analog. And they use call servers, so they're using computers versus the traditional switching networks. And so if you had watched 2 weeks ago, I had shared a YouTube video on how switching networks work when moving a call through the network. So this does not fall into that type of system. It's all phone based, internet based, and using servers versus switching networks. And then a phone number is not a must, but in that case, you will need a URI, which is a Uniform Resource Identifier. I have a whole section on URIs, URL, URN that we do at a later time. But just so you know, there are VoIP type phones when we look at calls that are coming from Skype and Zoom potential and things like that. They don't have a phone number attached to them, but they have to have a Uniform Resource Identifier. So there's that. And then a VoIP service provider is a company that offers VoIP telecommunication services that may be used to generate the 911 call and interconnect with the 911 network. One of the other issues with VoIP way back in the day is I remember playing a call in one of my, or a situation in one of my classes that I taught, I'm going to say back in 2006 when I first started teaching nationally across the country, where VoIP service providers did not have to actually offer 911 services. And so in a little tiny print, it basically said, unless you pay extra, you can't call 911. And that was kind of a big deal. And I remember using a call about a home invasion where I think he was a doctor maybe, and there was a home invasion into his home and his daughter called 911, tried to call again, and she got the traditional boo boo dee. Your call can't be completed as dialed. So she had to actually run to a neighbor's house to be able to do that, to be able to call 911. So FCC rules have changed. VoIP providers actually have to follow some rules. But again, with a lot of things in 911, we don't have anybody to police them. And we'll talk about the importance in reporting some of these things when it comes to our attention in a few slides. But some of the popular VoIP providers on the commercial side, VocalTel was one of the earlier ones, Vonage and Nextevia. And Vonage, I have to laugh. I have to share this story. My daughter was 3 when it started hitting our area. So Vonage, VoIP was available in 1995 in different sorts, but about 2006 was when Vonage hit this area, and we were starting to see challenges in those 911 calls. And I used to get so frustrated that whenever the Vonage commercial would come on, the one that was like do 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 do, I would say Vonage sucks. And the commercial came on one day, and there's my 3-year-old saying Vonage sucks, and I realized that she is a parrot at this point. Another situation with that, a woman came into the 911 center and said, hey, I'd like to get some information from the 911 center on getting my mother-in-law Vonage. It said something about 911, and I wasn't sure what that meant. And the first question I asked her is, do you like your mother-in-law? Like, that's really going to be the bottom line question, right? Because her call may not always get to 911 if needed. So there was a lot of explaining that we had to do because of the VoIP service providers not providing the services as they should have been provided in the early days. Much better these days, but we still have issues. So that's it for the networking continued part. No, it's not. This part's in there too. Sorry about that. But we're going to go over transport facilities. Now, last week, I told you the difference between facilities and facilities. So we have facilities that are actually buildings. So the central office, end office buildings are called facilities, but we also have transport facilities. And that is part of our transport system, which transport facilities, transport systems or transport facilities refer to the physical medium over which transmissions take place. So a transport system are able to connect the dot. It's like a connect the dots puzzle to get voice and data from point A to point B. So we have a few that we need to identify that you should know the difference. So copper was where we originally started in this endeavor. And it was the original infrastructure of the telephone system. And now this copper image has more than two wires or copper pairs in there. But they're often, in our profession, they are often referred to as a twisted pair, as they're usually a pair of wires that are twisted together. And then they are put into another kind of coated mechanism to protect it. So the two insulated pairs are twisted around each other to reduce that interference once they're encased in that. But back in the day, there were some challenges with some interference with our copper wiring. We're going to move ahead into a new place, but the insulation was to help reduce any interference that we would have. We used to have an issue with our copper pairs whenever it would rain heavily in a certain area of town, and we would get a lot of static on our line. We would get phantom 911 calls. It was a pain in the buttocks. And then we have fiber optic. As you can see there, it looks just like one of the cheap little toys there. Now, I'm just going to be clear here is that's a cheaply made toy on the bottom. And I say the word cheap for a reason, because I want you to make the correlation to the cheap toy for one of the bullets there. But at the circus, it's not cheap, but it is a cheap little toy, right? So don't want to confuse you. You pay a lot of money for it at the circus, but it's really a cheap little toy. Fiber optic is a technology in which light is transmitted through thin filaments of glass. Now, that's a question that I know I have seen before, and I have heard it possibly being on the exam. So the fiber optic connection piece is to the thin filaments of glass, and you can kind of see that that's what it looks like. It is only digital, and only digital can be used on fiber, not analog. And that's kind of like the VoIP piece of it. And then thousands of simultaneous voice signals and large amounts of data can be transmitted over long distances. Okay. I don't know if you've ever had one of these cheap little toys, but they last for a long time. They do. I bought my daughter one. It ended up in a box somewhere, and it still worked many years later. So, and then it provides high bandwidth at a relatively low cost and requires less space. So you think about these little tiny filaments there, less space there, and it is much more cost effective. So less money means cheap. So think of the cheap little toy. And it's not as sensitive to interference and provides a cleaner transmission. So a way to think of or remember, so if you get, copper versus fiber optic and which one is less prone to interference, go back to the cheap little toy. You can do this with it and it's still going to work, right? So think of, you got a little kid playing with it and interfering with the signals and it's still going to work. So hopefully that'll help you differentiate between those bits of pieces of information. And then a microwave signal, also called shortwave, and the shortwave is comparable to what it is that it's going to offer. It's a wavelength of radio signal that travels in a straight line for a short distance. So a lot of times we end up having to have a repeater because these types of signals travel using line of sight, which is approximately 30 miles, depending. And after that, they will need a repeater. It uses electromagnetic waves in radio frequency to transmit voice and data. And so I know that a microwave also uses electromagnetic waves. And so I'm going to use that to remind me that it is the microwave signal that uses electromagnetic waves. And it just sounds like bad, right? Like if you just stand in front of it, it sounds bad, right? The radiation and all that stuff. And then there are problems that cause interference, especially weather-related issues. I remember when we were on a lower band and had to use the repeater, we would tend to get skip from somewhere in the southern part of the country because they didn't sound like us and they referred to the Piggly Wiggly a lot. So we don't have any Piggly Wigglies and we don't have a southern accent. So those shorter lines of sight, having to use the repeater, and then think about the repeater as being the ability to make that sound go much further, much longer, and with that, it could potentially cause some skip, especially with weather-related incidents. The satellite facility is a specialized form of microwave transmission, but the tower is actually in the sky. The satellite is approximately 22,300 miles above the equator, and it moves with the Earth, which is why a stationary dish is pointed towards one place. So if you look at something that's using a satellite, you just have to kind of face whatever that mechanism is that's bringing in the signal towards one of the satellites. And then if you're having any issues, you just kind of move it to make sure that you're getting the right connection. And then coaxial cable is a cable created to be able to be shielded from outside interference. The cable is composed of conducting wire called the core conductor. It's located inside another cylindrical conducting wire called the shield. It has the capability of transmitting large amounts of data at a high rate of speed. And so if you need to remember which one is capable of transmitting large amounts of data at a high rate of speed, just think about this is the cable that you would often plug your cable in, right? And so the data signal for a television show with lots of colors, lots of moving, etc., needs to be able to carry a large amount of data, and it has to come in pretty quickly or else we'll be having lag and all of that stuff. And then it's primarily used to deliver that high-speed data like computer connections and commonly used for cable television. Okay. And then with each one of these facilities comes something called a quality of service. And that quality of service is a measurement of the overall performance of that particular service. And then these are some of the words that may not be familiar to you unless you're familiar with kind of that networking, transport facilities, etc. But latency. So the quality assurance is going to measure the latency, packet loss, and jitter. So latency is the time it takes for the data packet to go from one place to another. Okay. So if there isn't an appropriate, if latency is off, if I speak and the latency is off, it may cause my transmission to be slower. Therefore, I have somebody else who talks on the radio, and then they are stepping on each other. The data packet itself is what is being referred to when we have packet loss. And when we have packet loss, all of the components are not going to reach its expected destination. So packet loss occurs when a network packet fails to reach its expected destination, resulting in information loss. So it distorts the audio and it may actually sound robotic. So pieces of it are missing. And then jitter is the variation in time delay between when a signal is transmitted and when it's received over the network connection, measuring the variability in what's called the ping. And so what this causes is a choppy radio transmission. So the quality of service is going to monitor all three of those things. And then we will touch on security, 4 components of security when it comes to networking architects in the 911 center. So we have our physical security, which is the protection of personnel, hardware, software, networks, and data from physical actions and events that could cause serious loss or damage to an enterprise, agency, or institution. And so that's bulletproof glass in the lobby. That's making sure that the places where our servers are is secured, fire suppression systems, etc. And then there is cybersecurity, which protects computer systems, networks, and data from cyber threats. In emergency services, robust cybersecurity measures are essential to safeguard critical information and prevent unauthorized use. There's a lot of personal and confidential data that is accessible in our public safety world. So cybersecurity has to be at an all-time high. The network security encompasses measures to protect the integrity and confidentiality of data transmitted over the networks. In emergency services, network security ensures secure communications and data exchange within the 911 infrastructure. And a lot of times that information is what is referred to as encrypted. And that means that there has to be kind of a lock and key in place to be able to send that information from one place to another securely. So anybody getting in there, maybe they do breach the cyber aspect of it, but when they get in, they may not be able to actually access the data or understand what that data is without the capability of I'm looking for the word that I just used, encrypted. So if they don't have the way to unencrypt it, then they're not going to get access. And then personnel security involves policies and procedures to ensure trustworthiness and integrity and individuals involved in emergency services. Background checks, training, and access controls contribute to personnel security. Now, up in the physical part, personnel security means physically protecting the people that are in the facility, but personnel security as it pertains to getting fingerprinted and signing off on policies and procedures, and like having one of my dispatchers run a few folks like Benjamin Affleck and Matthew Damon and Jason Veritek and Theodore Ruski. And yeah, so folks that we're not supposed to be running. Yeah, she's not working anymore in this profession, but there has to be personnel securities in place as well, because we can get in a little trouble if we're running folks that we shouldn't be. So don't do that. Okay. And then there is something called a denial of service. Denial of service, a DOS attack, DOS, is a type of cyber attack intended to overwhelm the resources of a target PSAP, and deny the ability of legitimate users of the target to use the normal service as the target provides. In this case, this was almost a denial of service in Lawrence County, Tennessee. And I'm not sure if Marty is on. I know that he has been joining us periodically. Just check in real quick. He might watch the recording. But if you want to hear some really valuable information about what happened in Lawrence County, Tennessee, head on over to my podcast on Scene First with Tracy Eldridge. And yes, I know I'm behind in posting episodes, but they will be going out soon. But episode 27 with Marty Crum in Lawrence County, Tennessee, they had a situation where they almost lost access to all of their data. It was not by any fault of anyone on the team. Nobody clicked on anything. It's basically these knucklehead scammers are constantly trying to get into people's systems. So the way that it kind of got explained to me is that they had done some updates and there was just a little spot, a little crack in the network that was not protected for whatever reason. And that's where this particular hacker got in. And if you look at the picture on the right, you see these little locks. They started appearing on all of their information on the desktop. And then there were a couple of other things that popped up that were not theirs. This was handled very quickly. The team did a very good job. But because of the mechanisms that Marty's agency had in place, they were able to get the threat shut down very quickly. And that meant shutting down the computers as quickly as possible. And then it took some time to recover. They did lose some of their information, but not nearly as much as they may have if they didn't get this taken care of quickly. So really good episode there. Marty drops some technology that they used that one alerted him immediately to the threat. He was able to remotely get into the desktop, see what was happening, get them shut down. They did a really good job. Did it cost them financially? Yeah, it did, because they had to have some companies come in to be able to retrieve some of the data on backups, etc. But this was almost a denial of service situation. So denial of service doesn't always mean somebody is clicking on something. There are many ways that they can get in there and do that. And then a TDOS attack is a telephone denial. Oops, I see a typo there. I'll fix that. Telephone denial of service. So TDOS is a form of a denial of service directed at telephony interface that generates numerous phone calls, tying up the network and preventing the destination from receiving legitimate calls. Occasionally, the T in TDOS is either telephone or telecommunications. I love to give examples if folks want to kind of look into how this can happen. Here's a situation that happened in Gardner, Massachusetts, where an IRS phone scammer targeted the Gardner residents and the police department, where a scammer had requested information from an elderly resident. The elderly resident realized that he had probably just been scammed, contacted the police department, and gave some information to the police officer. The IRS scammer then contacted the police officer at the Gardner Police Department to get the information that was missing. And within a matter of seconds, that scammer was able to secure all of their phone lines into that 911 center and basically started robo-dialing. And so the phones ultimately got tied up for I think the article says 20 minutes. But it was about 20 minutes before they could get access to their phone system. And what they also did is they also started calling the residents with the phone number of the police department saying they needed to contact the police department. So be careful and you know, how we talk to our scammers if they're calling the police department, because if they get upset with you, they can do some damage. But this was a great article to just kind of see how they move through that. I know it was super stressful for them at that time, but lessons learned always along the way. So when you get your PDF, you'll be able to click on that link if you wanted to check that out as well. But that's what we consider a TDOS attack. The other time, there's another one out there. I don't have it in here, but I do have it in one of my classes that I teach. And there was I want to say he was like 18, and his name was Meet Dansai, or Dasai, but the first name is Meet. So if you Google Meet, Meet Densai or Dansai, and 911 hack, he accidentally jammed up many 911 centers. He was looking for something something about an app or an Apple breach, and he wanted to prove that there was this breach, and so he created a clickable link, and somehow, some way, the link that he clicked went viral on Twitter, and it was encouraging people to click on this link, and when they clicked on the link, it actually dialed 911 from their wireless device. And the problem was, once it started dialing 911, they could not disconnect. So 911 had to answer it. And I don't know if there's anybody in here that remembers that, was a part of that. But I want to say it was over in Arizona area, where it got hit pretty significantly. But there were a few different areas where this took place. And again, a TDOS attack, telephone distributed telephony, telephone, telecommunications, denial of service. And then there's a DDoS attack, distributed denial of service. So when you go back to the situation that happened in Lawrence, Tennessee, that's a distributed, that's a denial of service. It's one agency. A distributed denial of service, DDoS attack, is when the attack is more than one, often thousands of unique IP addresses. A DDoS attack occurs when multiple systems flood the bandwidth or resources of a targeted system. Such as an attack is often a result of multiple compromised systems where a botnet has flooded the target in the system. And so this could be a very large scale attack. So say somebody went after Chase Bank. There's lots of computers on that network. And if the Chase banking servers and network had been attacked, that could cause a lot of issues, right? So a distributed denial of service is they kind of hit one place, but it's going to affect a lot of computers. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to move into types and features of 911, types of features in 911. And we will start first with types of 911 systems. And we're going to go back in time. So long time ago, Haleyville, Alabama, we had our first 911 call. I want to say it was like 57 years ago at this time. So I think it was February 16th, 1968, where we started the basic 911 thing. And so we talked about the history of 911 as where it came from in our previous session. But what basic 911 was just that. It's probably a little red phone, just like this one. And it was an emergency telephone system that automatically connects 911 callers to a designated answering point. The call routing was determined by the originating central office only. So back in the day, we didn't have calls going to other jurisdictions or sending them other places. So basically, if I'm in my home and I pick up my landline and I would dial 911, it would go to the PSAP where my central office was. The interconnection to other telephone service providers, TSPs, is not possible because it's not a tandem environment. And so we'll talk more about tandem, but tandem, as I briefly explained 2 weeks ago, the tandem is kind of like a pass off, right? It's like working together in unison. For basic 911, there was no tandem in place. It was voice only. And something that a lot of folks are not aware of, I was not aware of when I first started teaching this stuff. I always thought basic 911 was basic 911, that you did not get any Annie Alley associated with it. And that apparently the lie detector determined that's a lie, because basic 911 may actually support Annie Alley. So I'll tell you about that in a second. But the first thing we need to know about our Annie and Allie is who they are. I will never forget Mona Wallace in my first 911 training class when I was a baby dispatcher in 1996. She referred to them as Big Al and Little Annie. So if I had to remember quickly which one was which, Big Al had all the information and Little Annie, just the phone number. Because there's a lot to remember when you're a baby dispatcher. So the Annie, automatic number identification, is the telephone number associated with the call. Allie, automatic location information. I'll fix that also. The automatic display at the PSAP of the caller's telephone number, the address or location of the phone, and supplementary emergency services information of that location of which the call originates. And I'll get more into that in just a little bit when we talk about ESN numbers. So when basic 911 had Annie and Allie, it was the first major advancement to basic 911 through CAMA, which is centralized automatic message accounting. We are going to cover that more. And I know that there are CAMA questions on the exam, but we will cover it. We will cover it in another section. But what CAMA was used for, first, it was originally used for toll call billing. So if you remember, when you place that call and it goes to the end office, which could also be the central office, but it makes it to the end office, meaning this is the end of the line for my particular phone service. And if I'm calling Aunt Sophia McGillicuddy in the North Shore, it was going to be a long distance call. So CAMA, centralized automatic messaging accounting, was originally used to be able to first capture the phone number. When it captures the phone number, it will say, all right, this phone number, it has long distance calling, but not until after 7 p.m. So I now need to know how long the call is, how much we got to charge them for the toll call billing. And it assists at this time in routing that call. It evolved to capture the name and address at a later time. It is done by wrapping the phone number in a data message and sending it to an Alley database created for this purpose. So there was a time where there was a misunderstanding. Well, some may have thought that having a name and address made it E911. There are more components to E911 than just name and phone number. So we'll talk about that. But there are folks that had what was considered basic 911, but we still had a name and an address associated with it. I hope that makes sense. And another term for taking that phone number out, wrapping it in data and sending it off is called parsing. So when a phone number is parsed out of something, it's usually wrapped in data and sent somewhere. So for those of you, for those of you that remember, well, actually, if you have a Rapid SOS integration, that is what happens to the phone number. So when that phone number hits the integration, that phone number gets parsed out, in other words, taken out, and it's wrapped in a question, which is data, and then it's sent to the Rapid SOS emergency platform. And the question is asked, do you have any more information on this? Just like it did with basic 911 with Annie and Allie information. Parse out the phone number, wraps it up in data, and sends it off. At this time, the TSP, telephone service provider, typically was the one that would operate the 911 Alley database. This is not enhanced 911. And again, I've had to explain this to a couple of folks because they thought that if the address and the name were there, then it becomes enhanced. Enhanced had a few more components with one very specific component. And if that specific component is not present, which it's not with basic, then it's not enhanced. And so what is enhanced? Enhanced 911 is a telephone system that includes network switching, database, public safety answering point premise elements that are capable of, one, displaying Annie and Allie. So that is the same, but here's where the kicker lies. This is the biggest difference right here. And then the others are added on. But the biggest difference between basic 911 with Annie Alley is a selective router, being able to selectively route the call based on the caller's physical location. Okay, so selective routing is the big one. And I'm going to keep saying it because I know it comes up. And it's really important. It also introduces, and we're going to go over each one of these. It also introduces selective and fixed transfer, alternate routing, and default routing. And I will tell you, I struggled when I took my exam in early 2021. This was a part that I struggled on because I do know that there were a bunch of questions. And I don't know if I felt as confident in these definitions as I do today. And I'm going to help you remember them. I wish I had me to help me remember them because this was just something because of the way that the terminology was. I just really struggled with trying to remember what was what was what. And then I finally got it. So I'll be sharing it with you. Generally speaking, enhanced 911 has three components that the basic 911 and the basic 911 with Annie and Allie did not have. Enhanced has a MSAG, a master street address guide. We'll identify that specifically later. It has an ESN number, an emergency service number, which lives inside of an emergency service zone. We're going to go over that in a few minutes. And then a selective routing database. Selective routing database is kind of the list of if this, then that. Where does it go from there? Okay. And again, remember, Enhanced 911 added the ability to selectively route based on location, and it also provides the callback number and location. So the big key there is the selective router. So don't miss that question. I told you a lot. There's a wireless section listed here, but I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to go over it at another time because there's a lot more in the manual. And that does is going to take a little bit more time. So we will go over that where I think it's supposed to go. And then, looks like it jumped over that slide. And then we are also going to dig deep into next generation 911 and G911 that we've been hearing about for a wicked long time. And we're still not even fully there yet. You know, folks, I remember when we started talking about next gen 911, and the only thing that next gen 911 meant to me back then is we were going to be able to get text messages and video. That's it. That's the extent of next gen 911 to what I understood. Then I remember going to conferences and everybody was talking about next gen 911, but it took a really long time to get here. We have some agencies that are fully next gen. We have some that are partially next gen. Yeah, Clint, they were talking it up in 2005, right? Like I remember coming back from a meeting probably in like 2005, 2006. Well, it was probably 2006 because I was the chief dispatcher in 2006. And I remember going to a meeting at the state 911 department probably not long after this. And I came back and I said to one of my folks that was working, Ricky, I said, I went to a meeting today and they were talking about text to 911 and all this. And he said, after I was done talking, he said, I'm putting in my notice. I said, for what? He goes, for text to 911. And he pulled out his flip phone out of his pocket and he goes, this is the extent of my texting. He goes, I don't want to be any part of this texting thing. And I was like, no, don't worry about it. It's going to be a little bit. And I'm going to say I left my center in 2016 in Massachusetts. And shortly after that, they rolled out text to 911 in the state of Massachusetts. So it took a little while to get there, but they did. But Next Gen 911 is a secure IP-based open standard system comprised of hardware, software, data, operational policies, and procedures. It is not just text and video. There's so much more. There is, efficiency, redundancy, a lot more, but we'll talk more on that later. And then the features of the 911 system are as follows. The selective router that I just recently talked about. So the selective routing, again, is the big differentiator between basic and enhanced 911. Selective routing is when the 911 calls are routed based on the street address of the 911 caller. So way back when 911 first kind of started and we didn't have a lot of wireless devices, it was pretty easy, right? You could call 911, they're calling from a landline. We would get the location, we would get the name of the facility, we would get the resident's name. It was great. I never quite understood, though, why couldn't the wireless carriers provide the name of the subscriber? Like, it just never made sense to me. And we're still here. We're still not getting it unless it's through the third party like Rapid SOS, where we have additional data coming. Like there was a spot for it on the alley, but it wasn't available. The selective router cannot understand addresses. So while we think, well, the selective router is going to route based on what the address is, but it can't actually read the address. It can understand numbers. So the addresses need to be turned into numbers, and that is where the ESN comes in, the emergency service number. I am blown away, and I'm not being disrespectful. I am blown away by the number of folks in 911 centers that are call takers that do not know what the ESN number is for their jurisdiction. Some have 1, some have 3, some have 10. But you should, as a telecommunicator call taker, you should know what your ESN is. Because if a call gets misrouted to you and the ESN number is incorrect, that is part of the discrepancy situation where that call needs to be reported to someone. It shouldn't have come to you. And so if you don't know what your ESN number is, then how are you verifying that information that is on the alley screen, where the ESN number will be presented to you as a call taker? And so there is another section where the ESN and the ESZ, the emergency service zone, is on the body of knowledge, but I think it's important to talk about it in this section, and it will be right after this particular slide, because the selective router is based on the location, but the ESN translated location. And then there is what is called a selective transfer. That is the capability of automatically transferring a 911 call to a response agency, typically designated as police, fire, and EMS or emergency medical, based on the ESN of the caller. And I'll get a little bit more into that, but that's happening kind of behind the scenes. And I'll explain that in just a minute. This is what an emergency service zone looks like. It is a geographic zone served by police, fire, and EMS agencies. Each ESZ contains the set of street addresses served by those agencies. The ESZ is assigned up to 5 digits that can selectively route, that the selective router can use to route the call to the appropriate PSAP. These numbers are called emergency service zone numbers. And so I snatched this picture. This is the 911 center that absorbed my 911 center, the Regional Low Colony Communication Center. And their emergency service zone is the red line you see over here, a red line you see over here, and a red line you see over here. And it may be, there may be more. They may have, I think they took on more folks. But at a time, their emergency service zone is who they dispatch for, the entities they dispatch for. Inside each emergency service zone is emergency service numbers. And that is a number that the selective router can understand. I'm pretty sure it's usually only 3 numbers. I don't know of any that are 4. It says 3 to 5, but I've never seen a 5-digit ESN number. But it's a 3 to 5 digit number that represents one or more emergency service zones. An ESN is defined as one of 2 types. It has 2 jobs. The administrative ESN facilitates dispatching the proper public safety agency. The routing ESN is an administrative, so basically that administrative ESN is assigned to each MSAG range to associate the physical address of the ESN. Now that says a lot, but I'm going to break it down for you very easily. When my community, so this is Rochester, this was my jurisdiction, okay? So when I had my 911 center, my emergency service zone was just this outlined Rochester, okay? So the routing ESN, when I first started as a telecommunicator, we had one ESN. It was 356. And that was both our administrative and our routing. And so if an address in Rochester was, well, if somebody in Rochester with any address that is on our MSAG dialed 911, the MSAG would identify the ESN and it would be routed to Rochester based on the ESN. So that's the routing ESN. The administrative ESN is the piece of your alley screen, as you can see here on the bottom, that basically tells you the town, the jurisdiction. It tells you who the PSAP is. So in this case, it's Regional Old Colony Communications. I got this from one of them. I said, I just need a screenshot. And then I got to explain to them why sometimes for the town of Rochester, it says ambulance service, Freetown Rescue. Now, this was something I chose to do to make it easier for my telecommunicators when they needed to notify a level of advanced life support before we were a paramedic service. So the administrative is going to tell you who is the community you will dispatch police, fire, or EMS for based on that particular ESN in that particular emergency service zone. I hope this is making sense. So what I did was, before we were at the advanced life support level, when we would do EMD, if an ALS prompt was triggered, then it was up to my call taker to identify based on location which paramedic service we were going to use. It was either going to be, so if it was on the left side of the screen address, it would identify a new ESN. So I don't remember what the second one was because I did it not long before I left. So I don't remember that one as well as I remembered the 356. But if the address, so we had a range of all of the addresses on the left side of town, that if that telecommunicator had to call for ALS, they would notify the Freetown ambulance service. If it was on the right side of the town, we would notify the Wareham EMS service. And so this was a quick way for, based on the location of the call, for my telecommunicator to administratively identify which service is going to go. If anyone has any questions about that, let me know. So some agencies will have several ESNs, some will have one. So if you don't know what your ESN number is, you should probably know that. Then there is something called a fixed transfer. The fixed transfer is a service that allows an established 911 call to be transferred by the PSAP telecommunicator to another PSAP destination. And that's probably, that might be fire, it might be EMS, it might even be a law enforcement agency. This is done by selecting a transfer key or a speed dial code. Fixed transfer uses the speed dial type calling feature of the E911 tandem office. E911 calls can also be transferred to non-PSAP locations, such as poison control or, wherever else you want to designate. And so I have an image here, these buttons right here. So this first one says local EMS. This one says poison control. I don't know what else the other ones say, but this is a fixed transfer. The number is fixed. It's the same number all the time. Okay. So if I have to just quickly transfer that call to somebody else. So in this scenario, 911, where's the location of your emergency? 123 Main Street. Okay. What's the problem there? Once we verify the address, somebody's having chest pain. Stay on the line with me. I'm going to transfer you to the local EMS, and boom, that's a fixed transfer. Okay. Call transferring, it's just that, the capability to redirect a call to another party. And then there's something called router to router transfer. So when you have two different 911 systems or two different 911 system selective routers that have the transfer codes of each other's router, if one of them gets a phone call that's not native to their selective router, and it has to go to their selective router, then you may see, or you won't see it, it's happening behind the scenes. There might be a router to router transfer. Okay. it will send the, so it will then send to the other selective router, then to the PSAP. So sometimes if there's a problem somewhere in the system, it may have to bypass the selective router, go router to router, and then selective router to get that call to the PSAP. So I don't know how deep they would go into these things, but this is more definitions that you should just know what it means. If it's router to router, then there's no selective router in between it. I guess that's how you can look at that. The definition of geospatial routing. So this emergency call routing function, we will go into much more in depth, but geospatial routing is the use of ECRF, emergency call routing function, and GIS, graphical information system, data to route an emergency call to the appropriate PSAP or emergency service provider based on the civic location or geographic coordinates provided with the call. So we're starting to see this more and more. It is my understanding that Massachusetts was the first state to go fully geospatial routing. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what we were told. And basically that meant that if the location of the device, such as rapid SOS type location, device-based location is available, then that call is going to be routed based on that location versus the location of the tower. Okay. So many of you remember or know when we have our phase 1, phase 2, it's going to hit a tower, and that tower is going to be the determinant of who gets that call. So if the tower's in my neighborhood, the call's coming to me. If the person's in my neighborhood, but the tower is in my neighbor's yard, then it's going to go to my neighbors. So geospatial routing allows that call to be delivered to the PSAP to where that call is located. Then there is policy-based routing. It's a technique that forwards and routes data packets based on policies or filters. And I refer to these as if this, then that. So there are times, and then this is where we will start to get into like the alternate routing and default routing, etc. Is that policy-based routing says, if the call is here, it's going to go here. If I don't know where it is, because for different reasons, and I'll give you an example in a minute, if I don't know where that call is supposed to go, well, it's got to go somewhere. So the policy says it's going to default route somewhere else. So policy-based routing, geospatial routing says, if the caller is located here, it's going to go here. But policy-based routing says, if we have a problem in here or something has to switch, it's going to follow this checklist, and this is where it's going to go. Any resend or any rebid is another feature. The ANI is retransmitted or rebid if the initial ANI is wonky and you need to get a proper ALI return. So in the beginning, we used to have to hit that button manually. Okay. Then there came a time where it would happen automatically. The phone system, so in this case, you can see here that RTX, retransmit, that's the definition, that's what that's there for, is whenever we would have a wireless 911 call, the first thing we would do is go up and click on that button. And then you had the clicker happy people. But just know that most systems generally only are able to rebid every 30 seconds. So you can click, 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 click on that button as much as you want, but that is like a morphine drip for a patient with a hip replacement. I get the button and I can click it as many times as I want, but it's only going to administer the medication every so often. And that's what the rebid button does, even if it's automatic. Some of them are getting much quicker. I will tell you and again, I always like to share just additional information for folks to have an understanding, is whenever someone would say to me, I don't need the Rapid SOS portal because I have an integration. And then I would say, well, how often does your integration update a location? So if this is a call in motion, if it's a kidnapping, a rolling domestic, an erratic operator versus an erotic operator, right? How often is your system updating? Well, 30 seconds. Okay. The portal is able to update every 3 to 5 seconds. Is that pertinent information? Is that valuable? Yes. So it was just one of my things when folks were like, we have the integration. And I got a whole list of other ones that folks should be using both the integration and the portal. But that's just my soapbox. So every 30 seconds or so. There's a button transfer, AKA speed dialing. Okay. And again, that goes back. That's the button transfer is the actual button that is used in a fixed transfer. So it says it there already. The capability of transferring a 911 call to a predetermined location by activating a single button. That's also called a fixed transfer. 911 trunk dialing. It implies that the 911 call routes through the originating serving central office directly to the PSAP, and there is no selective router involved. And that's just kind of exactly what it says, right? So if the question is, what differentiates this from that, it's going to be that there is no, it's not going through a selective router. It's just going directly from the central office right to the PSAP. Alternate routing. This is where I would get myself a little confused. So selective transfer and fixed transfer. Selective transfer, it's going to select where that call goes on the back end. Like you're not even seeing that. Fixed transfer is when you click on the button. Okay. So I kind of showed you that. The alternate routing and the default routing. This is one that took me a minute to figure it out, because if you by definition read the definitions of them, they are they're very similar. And if you don't think through the process, depending on what the question is, and like I said, I know I had some questions on alternate and default routing. I don't remember exactly what they look like, but it is important to fully read the question. And when I say fully read the question, I mean that on every single question, but more so on these, because if you don't read the full question to see what it's looking for, it's going to be very easy to pick the wrong one on this. So alternate routing is the capability of routing a 911 call to a designated alternate location if all 911 trunks are busy or out of service. Now, that could also sort of kind of happen with default routing, but there's going to be a difference. The word designated, it means we've already picked, based on me having an issue with my 911 system. I already knew in my jurisdiction that my alternate was Marion Police Department. So the day we lost our 911 phone system, those calls, when the call couldn't get to Rochester, it knew it had to get to Rochester. It was at the right play. And I use play for a reason. I'm going to tell you. So the call knew to go to that right play, but the lead broke its leg, right? So the lead in the play broke its leg. My agency being the lead in the play. The leg is broken because somebody said break a leg. So the leg gets broken. Alternate routing, it's already identified who my alternate is, just like in a play. So the lead guy, Billy Bad Guy, and the alternate is Joey Bag of Donuts. If lead guy breaks his leg, then alternate Joey Bag of Donuts is going to step up. It may be activated on request or automatically if detectable when 911 equipment fails or the PSAP itself is disabled. And so there were two different times where our Marion Police Department, Joey Bag of Donuts, had to step up, and it was in the two different ways. So number one, we had a massive storm that came through, took out all the power lines. Our battery backup, they don't last forever. Learn that lesson. Learned it was probably about 46 hours and then boop, gone. And so our 911 system boop, went down. So that was an automatic routing to the alternate, which was the one that we had already designated. The second time we had to send the calls there is when we were having an issue with some of our calls disconnecting, and we didn't know why. And so until somebody could get out there and figure it out, I didn't want our system disconnecting on callers. So we temporarily sent our calls over to Marion. That way, the caller wouldn't get disconnected. I would rather another trained professional have the whole call than us lose it in the middle. So two different ways. You can either, it's automatically going to happen if your system shuts down for whatever reason, or you can manually transfer that as well. This is what you can do to remember the alternate routing. That's what the backup person is called in a play, right? Alternate. You already know who it is. If there's a problem with the system, the call knows where it's supposed to be going. So the key factors here with alternate routing is the call knows where it's supposed to go, but it can't get there because of something at the lead situation. Okay? Anybody have any questions on that? Please throw them in the chat. Default routing, it's going to sound similar, but it's a little bit different. This is the capability to route a 911 call to a designated default PSAP when the incoming 911 call cannot be selectively routed due to an ANI failure or other cause. Now, while there are some similar words, and I'm sure if this is the first time you're really deep diving into these two different things, it could be a little bit confusing. And that's why I spend a decent amount trying to explain it, because I do know there's a few questions on it. The default PSAP is considered designated, but we may not know which one it's going to go to. There are a few designated default PSAPs, and I'll get to those in just a second. The difference here is the call doesn't know where to go, because the piece that is missing is the call cannot be selectively routed. In the case that I just explained to you, my 911 calls knew where they were going. The call was selectively routed. It selected my PSAP. It knew it had to go to the PSAP, but it couldn't get in the door. So it had to boop, bounce to Marion. It had to go to my alternate. The difference with the default routing is it doesn't know where to go because it wasn't selectively routed there. Many reasons this can happen. You have an issue with a multi-line phone system. I'm going to show you that in a second. There's an ANI failure. No record found. I don't know where this call has to go. I use Wi-Fi dialing on my cell phone. My Wi-Fi dialing, the address that is associated with my Wi-Fi dialing says 123 Main Street. But the geographic location on my wireless device says that I'm at 620 Oak Street. So it's like, I don't know where to go. So if the call cannot be selectively routed based on the location, because there's other factors, see the word other? There's a whole bunch of other reasons why a call may get default routed. There's so many of them. Then it's going to default route. It's going to basically go, I don't know where to go. So I'm going to default route to one of these other places. And I'm going to use this one as an example to kind of explain this. If I asked you where this caller was located, most would say 30 Braintree Hill Park. It's a business. I'm not giving out anybody's personal information here. 30 Braintree Hill Park, floor 1, Braintree, Mass. This call came to my 911 center in Rochester, which is about an hour away from Braintree, via Northern 911 in Canada. And let me first by saying, stop picking on Northern 911. I see what folks say in chat, 911 chat groups. They'll say, what's up with Northern 911? And then people get all irritated and they're like, I don't know, but they send me a bunch of calls and blah, 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 blah. Number one, they're super professional. They will identify who they are. Hi, this is operator 102 calling from Northern 911 with a transfer for, and in this case, such and such Bradford Lane, Rochester, Mass. Is this your area of jurisdiction? And as soon as I say yes, they're going to pass that call off to me. But what happened in this particular situation, this was a work from home situation. The company was located in Braintree. The person was physically located in my town. She went to dial a 9 to get an outside line, which we know is against the law now. Then she dialed 1 because it was going to be a toll call, and she forgot the number she was dialing. So she looked at the number, and when she went back to dial it, she dialed the 1 again. So in theory, she dialed 911. So this is what it looked like. When she dialed 911 in this particular situation, the 911 call happens. The caller is located in Rochester. The alley is saying that she's in Braintree, and the call doesn't know actually where to go. Do I go to Rochester? Do I go to Braintree? So it goes to neither. It goes to Canada, right? That totally makes sense. It doesn't always make sense. It will default route to an emergency call relay center. And in our case, that was Northern 911. So I like to refer to our ECRCs as the Island of the Misfit 911 calls. So we need to say thank you to them for handling our misfits. They handle our mistake calls that don't know where to go. And thank God that they do, because otherwise they'd be out somewhere else and not get to us. So Derek says, so if a call, as an example, from a UC phone system without a verified location is routed to an ECRC, is that yes? Yep, absolutely. So a couple of things. When that happens, it's not supposed to happen. So something has to get fixed, and that's where we're going to get led into discrepancy reporting. And we are just about out of time, but I do want to finish this particular topic because I don't want to cut it off in the middle. So I'll probably need just 5 more minutes. I will finish up this topic. You can stay on. If you need to jump off, the recording will be there ready for you when you get there. But it's important to understand the difference between alternate routing. It's already determined where the call's going. The call knows where it's going. Everybody knows places on the set. Everybody knows their role. And then the leg gets broken and we got to use our backup, right? So that's the alternate. In the default routing, nobody really knows anything. Nobody knows where the call is supposed to go. So our Island of the Misfit 911 calls, our ECRCs, they're going to step up to the plate. And we have a few of those. There are 2 big ones in this for us. I know Northern 911 transfers a lot of our calls into our 911 centers, as does the Intrado call center that is located in Colorado. So my recommendation, get the phone numbers into those places in case you have to ask them any questions. I don't know how Intrado does it when they transfer calls, because I didn't actually experience any of the calls that came from Intrado. All of our default routing would go to Northern 911, and they are nothing but professionals. So say thank you for them to picking up our slack. So there's that. And then this last section on discrepancy reporting really does follow in suit. It is in our manual or body of knowledge, etc. But discrepancy reporting is really important, and we are not giving it the attention that it deserves. There are folks that are receiving calls from the ECRCs on a regular basis that discrepancy reports are not being filled out. Discrepancy reporting should be filled out, and I'll give you a couple of examples of when they should be filled out. Because if a call's going to Intrado or a call is going to the EPRC, that should not be happening. Okay? It shouldn't be happening. Nobody says, I'm going to use Northern 911 or Intrado as my call answering point for my calls. So if it's going there in error, and somebody's got to figure out why. And if you're not filling out a discrepancy report, or your agency doesn't have a process in place for discrepancy reporting, then we need to get this taken care of. Okay. As far as your guide goes, it wants you to head over to the NENA technical standard document, which is for reporting and resolving ANI, ALI, and discrepancies and no record found for wireless, wireline, wireless, and VoIP technologies. And you will have the link there. So I definitely recommend checking out that document, 1 for the exam, and 2 to make sure that your folks are knowing how to report discrepancies. The purpose of that document is to standardize the ANI and ALI trouble and no record found reporting to facilitate their timely resolution. And ANI and ALI trouble is defined as the wrong ALI, no ANI, wrong ANI, no ANI, and ALI discrepancy, which is including but not limited to no record found. So when you get wrong ANI, which includes a 911 area code, and I have a little asterisk there because we don't always know what the phone number should be for a 911 area code, because many of them are disconnected cell phones, but there are some that are not. That's another section for another time. I'll be going over non-service initialized devices, and again, how the Rapid SOS portal can help there too. You're also reporting an ALI discrepancy, no ANI that's coming in, no record founds, and true misrouted calls. And what I mean by a true misrouted call is the scenario that I just said. Callers in Rochester, ALI says Braintree, call goes to Northern 911 in Canada. That's a true misrouted call. If I am in Rochester, Mass, and New Bedford gets a 911 call from my neighborhood and they have to transfer it into me, there's no scenario in which that should happen. That is a true misrouted call. A perceived misrouted call is I'm standing on the line between Rochester and Acushnet, and my call hits the Acushnet tower and the call gets transferred to an Acushnet PSAP. That is not a misrouted call. That's unfortunately the way that the system is set up. So you need to know the difference between a misrouted call and a true misrouted call. So hopefully that helps. If you should want more information on what I was just talking about a little bit deeper, as far as it pertains to Carey's law, multi-line phone systems, calls getting misrouted, and discrepancy reporting, head on over to my website on scenefirst.com/training/webinars. Scroll down to the bottom, look for this picture of me, Hank Hunt, and Mark Fletcher, and you can register to receive the on-demand recording of the webinar. Where are they calling from? That's not right. Now what? We go into detail in a lot of that stuff, so that could be a helpful resource as well. Now, with that, we are going to wrap up. Just let me get to the end here. As mentioned earlier, you will have several questions like this at the end of the PDF. It should be uploaded at some point by the end of the day on Monday. That is my goal. But this is how I'm putting them. So you have the question there. And then the next slide is going to have the questions with the answer there. So I hope that is beneficial to you. I am putting up my contact information here. Clint, I will answer your question in just 1 second. If you have any questions and would like to email me, my email address is there, or you could scan that QR code and just write a quick question there. I would love it if you supported my social media. A lot of that money, a lot of the money that I get through sponsorships for like the Telecommunicator Week is because folks love to see their name all over my social media. So the more names I have there, the better. In the lower right-hand corner is a private first responder wellness group, the On Scene First Safety Net on Facebook. If you'd like to join us, just request to join, but make sure you answer the question as to what agency you work for, so I don't have to pull out my defective detective dispatcher skills and hunt you down. That's there for you. We've had a lot of great conversations. Jessica, thank you. I love that I'm doing that too. A few folks have said it's been helpful. Clint, can we access these videos via our access to Google Drive? The videos actually, these videos, they get uploaded to the YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, as soon as the video, because it takes a little bit, and I do it when I'm, I won't get into all that, but I try to have everything in place and out by the end of the day on Monday. But if I was to get the video uploaded today, you would get notified that the video is available. Oh, sorry. The video is available. And then eventually you'll get an official email that says the PDF is there, all the other information there, etc. Karen, how can you change your email address? Nope, that's absolutely fine. If you could just shoot an email to info@onscenefirst.com and just ask my wonderful assistant if she can change your email in the group, and tell her what email you would like it changed to, and she will take care of that for you. So if we don't have any other questions, Clint, I hope that answered your question. There is a clickable link that can bring you to the YouTube channel, but just go onto YouTube and look for On Scene First with Tracy Eldridge. And there's a playlist that actually has all of it. There's playlists for each study group that I do. So if nobody has any other questions, we will wrap it up. And until next time, heroes, stay safe, stay strong, stay here. We need you.